For years, the conservative right has been all abuzz about the dangers of CRT, but they don't seem to know much about it. So I think I'll explain. Critical race theory, often referred to as CRT, originated in the 1970s, in the post civil rights era in America, and is largely misunderstood by the general public and even teachers. Critical race theory is an intellectual field that has its origins in the era when legal scholars and lawyers began to recognize and examine lingering, persistent racial disparities in society. It grew to include other academic fields such as sociology and political science, and the emerging fields of study that specifically examined structural disparities for a variety of sectors in our society that include gender studies, women's studies, Black studies, and disability studies. These are all within the domain of scholars and higher education. Critical race theory is not the domain of K 12 education. While CRT is bandied about as a serious threat to children in America, and schools and teachers are accused of teaching CRT, this is simply not true. And the basic tenets of critical race theory in no way suggest that white people should be taught to feel guilty for being white. It does examine issues like voter suppression, discrimination, police brutality, food scarcity, and other issues as they intersect with poverty, race, gender, or other human identities. But again, critical race studies are within the domain of researchers and scholars within institutions of higher education. So the campaign to eliminate CRT from K 12 education is a false flag designed to alarm the public and accuse schools of woke or leftist indoctrination. It's just false. Critical pedagogy should not be confused with critical race theory, although it often is. Critical pedagogy is a framework developed by Brazilian educator Paulo Freire, who focused on adult education in his home country. He was critical of an education system that functioned as a means of integrating a younger generation into a societal system that was already in place through conformity to the system, often a system that oppressed large segments of society. Freire outlined his ideas in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed after he was exiled from Brazil because his work to end illiteracy among the poor and working classes was seen as too radical. Freire's critique of education included his rejection of what he referred to as the banking model of education, in which students are taught only what those in positions of power deem appropriate. In other words, students are merely passive recipients of a set curriculum, and, as too often seen in current practice, what is tested is the limit of the knowledge students are given. Freire proposed a problem posing education, which includes praxis, dialogue, and conscientization. All of this is grounded in freedom, justice, and democracy. Praxis refers to practice. Freire's concept of praxis also includes learning and reflection. In other words, teachers learn to teach, put what they've learned into practice or action, and then, importantly, reflect on the effectiveness of their practice. There's nothing radical whatsoever in Freire's ideas about praxis. Teachers do this all the time. For example, they learn a new strategy to use with their students. They implement the strategy and then reflect, ask themselves if the strategy worked. The second tenet of Freire's critical pedagogy, dialogue, is not radical either. He rightfully positions the important role of dialogue in teaching as essential in the classroom, as teachers and students discuss, engage in conversations about what they are learning. It is the opposite of the banking model of teaching. And of course, speaking and listening standards are commonly included in literacy and language arts standards because they are essential components in literacy development. Freire's third tenet of critical pedagogy is conscientization. In order to understand this concept, consider the word conscience. It's a process in which individuals become aware of their own social reality through action and reflection. For teachers, this means a reflective journey in which students are invited to read the word and read the world, and in the process, envision themselves as empowered to create change, make improvements in the world. In learning to read the word and the world, students learn they can change the world to make it a more socially just place for all people and, for example, protect the planet from factors that cause climate change. Again, critical pedagogy is not critical race theory. It's a framework for engaging students of all ages in meaning making, empowerment, freedom, justice, and democracy. And in my opinion, this is what effective and excellent teachers do because this is why they entered the teaching profession to begin with. Critical literacy is another term that often gets confused with critical race theory. It is closely related to critical pedagogy, but more specific to reading and literacy learning. Critical literacy is not a method for teaching reading or a reading program implemented in a school. It does not take the place of teaching foundational reading skills, phonics, story elements, comprehension, or vocabulary. Critical literacy is sometimes taught in teacher preparation programs because it is important for teachers to be able to analyze the literature they share with their students and create literacy experiences that engage students in deep reading of texts as meaning making actions. In reality, teachers often never use the term critical literacy when developing lessons for teaching their students because, well, it's not a method. However, teachers do generally have a criteria for selecting books they use with their students and are thoughtful about how they use literature with their students to teach reading. I encourage teachers, those already working with students, as well as those who are in teacher preparation programs, to consider certain factors when selecting books to read aloud or ask students to read in class. For example, are the characters stereotyped? Are the students able to relate to the characters in the book? Do students of color in your class only see white students in the books you share with them? And is the information in the book accurate? Critical literacy also facilitates students' ability to read the word and the world and envision themselves as empowered to create a better world. But teachers don't stand before students and say, "Class, today we're going to do a critical literacy strategy." I mean, that's just not how it works. Is it the word critical that causes so much confusion and angst among the conservative right? I mean, that can't be the reason. I mean, critical thinking has been the cornerstone of education at all levels for as long as I can remember. But I do wish we could clear up some of the confusion. I've been an educator for over 30 years. I have never once heard a teacher tell white students to feel guilty for being white or called white students oppressors or colonizers. All the teachers I've known and worked with love their profession and genuinely work toward providing an equitable learning environment for all of their students. Embracing the diversity within a classroom has never been merely the domain of the woke or leftists. But disparaging advocates for DEI Diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly in schools, is the modus operandi of the MAGA right, and in my opinion, born out of ignorance. And honestly, conservatives do need to beef up their critical thinking skills. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. If you'd like to keep up with the latest in the Department of Education news, please consider subscribing. I'd appreciate that too.